Good morning. Good morning to you all. On this cool, relatively cool September day, overcast, with the promise of rain, perhaps. So, Bob called me earlier today. Bob and Francine can't be here because they're attending an event there up in Ferguson. There's an organic garden up there that Bob and some other friends of ours work at, and they're having a festival. So we wish them well and hope the rain waits until they're done. Well, last week we concluded the discussion of the Eightfold Path, and it's an ongoing topic, obviously, and inexhaustible. But I thought for now we could move on and talk about something else. There are two poems by Saigyo I would like to discuss. And these poems, I think, relate to a topic that came up last week during the discussion. So I thought they might be of interest. But before I get into that, I'll just mention that Carol and I viewed a documentary recently about the Paralympics called Rising Phoenix. And it was a story about transformation, a story about transforming disability into remarkable achievement. I thought it would be perhaps just one saccharine story after another, but it wasn't. It was very well done, I thought, and I recommend it. But I guess the topic today has to do with transformation. And I go back to Saigyo's poetry. Saigyo was a 12th century Japanese poet. And some have raised the issue previously at Heartland about spending so much time on long dead Japanese writers. And, you know, I could be accused of just being overly interested in history, and I am interested in history, but that's not the reason I go back to them. I go back to them because I see timelessness there. I see relevance, regardless of whether we're in the 12th century or the 21st century, regardless of whether we're in Japan or in St. Louis and its surroundings. So Saigyo, we've talked a lot about Dogen. Dogen lived in the 13th century, was born around 1200. Saigyo occupied the prior century, the 12th century. He was born in 1128 and died in 1190, about 10 years before Dogen was born, and was a widely acclaimed poet. And I'll just briefly recount his story. He was raised in a family, a warrior family. And he became, at a young age, because of his astuteness with the skills of the military trade, a palace guard for some of the upper echelons in the imperial court. So he was highly accomplished as a very young person in that regard. The imperial court at the time was in a state of somewhat, there was a lot of corruption, there was a lot of tumult. And actually, the warrior families in various places in Japan were gaining power. And instead of their assigned role of serving and protecting, they were becoming rulers and directors, ruling and directing. So this was the time of the samurai, of the warlords. And there were several families, and they fought. And actually, the monks, the Buddhist monks in the monasteries, some of them became involved in all this. And there were actually warrior monks. So in a way, it was a very socially confused time. With, I'm sure, at least as much tumult as we're experiencing now. But anyway, at age 23, Saigyo decided he'd had enough of this and shaved his head and became a Buddhist monk. Now, it's unclear actually who ordained him or what his training was. He didn't apparently spend a lot of time in a monastery. He became one of those wandering monks with a special facility for poetry. All of his life, he wrote poetry, but largely lived a hermit's life. Perhaps on the grounds of monasteries, they would have little hermitages that people could live in. So one of the aspects of Saigyo's training was a kind of meditation that was taught at that time that is still taught today. And it's called Gachi Rinkan, or moon disk meditation. And the meditation we did at the beginning of the session sort of was an homage to that, although the Gachi Rinkan meditation is much more complicated. But it involves visualizing a full moon in your heart space. And there are chants and various things that go along with it. But Saigyo was familiar with this imagery of the full moon. And for centuries preceding him, the full moon had been used as a symbol for the Buddha, for enlightenment, light. So Uh, the first poem I would like to share is this one. I thought I was free of passions, so this melancholy comes as a surprise. A woodcock shoots up from marsh where autumn's twilight falls. I thought I was free of passions, so this melancholy comes as a surprise. A woodcock shoots up from marsh where autumn's twilight falls. So this poem, I mean, it is what it is, and I don't, anything I say about it will be less than the poem itself, but nonetheless, it does talk about a kind of transformation. It also talks about this feeling of melancholy that came as a surprise. You know, sometimes after you have been practicing and studying Buddhism for a period of time, many people, it's been my experience, that it does lead to a level of equanimity, of steadiness. And sometimes when strong emotions arise, as they will, it can be a little surprising. Whoa, anger. Haven't felt that in a little while. Whoa, this is strong. Or loss, the pain of loss, sadness. So when these emotions arise, they can sometimes be a little surprising. And that's one of the reasons that Saigyo is so well known, is that he was one of the first Buddhist poets to really recognize that, yes, these emotions don't go away. They still happen. There can still be melancholy. There can still be sadness and loss and grief. And he talked about them just most frankly. But then a woodcock shoots up from the marsh, and he's drawn to noticing the autumn twilight. In Japan, the woodcock is a revered bird. They have them in North America too. They're a slightly different species. And they're well known for their mating ritual, which is highly complex and involves flying up to the sky and coming down again. But they hunt at night. So in the twilight, the woodcock would have been leaving for its nightly search for food. And this event of the woodcock flying up, momentarily anyway, took Saigyo out of his melancholy, out of his self-absorption, So instantaneous transformation. The, the second poem I would like to talk about is this one. It will be good. My body may cry itself into a pond of tears, but in it my unchanged heart will give lodging to the moon. It will be good. My body may cry itself into a pond of tears, but in it my unchanged heart will give lodging to the moon. So again, Saigyo is talking about difficult or painful emotions, tears. But oddly enough, the poem starts off, it will be good. It will be okay. And he talks about, as this translator uses the word, his heart, giving lodging to the moon in this pond of tears. Well, the Japanese word that is translated as heart here is kokoro, ko, ko-aro, which is a word that really lacks an English equivalent. And it includes what we would call heart, that sort of seat of feeling, emotion, seat of compassion. But it also includes the mind, thoughts. It actually includes sort of the whole realm of our lived experience. Sometimes it's translated as heart mind to give that sense. So even though he was experiencing this sorrow, we don't know what happened. There were lots of occasions for loss and disappointment and fret in Saigyo's life. As I mentioned, it was a very tumultuous time in Japan. He had many friends who were involved in this, and he had many losses. But in that pool of tears, he says his unchanged heart mind could reflect the moon. So despite these painful emotions, there was something there, as he says, unchanged and capable of reflecting Buddha, reflecting compassion and wisdom. So that image of the water reflecting the moon is a common one in Buddhist literature, at least in Japan, and I believe in China as well. Because it reflects the moon most accurately when the water is still. So bringing some stillness to the body and mind allows for that reflection to occur. So Saigyo says it will be good. I am experiencing this, but there is a quiet place that I know, that I have become familiar with, that I can always return to. So I think both of these poems talk about a kind of transformation, a kind of spiritual alchemy, if you will. Of course, the alchemists in the Middle Ages were intent on trying to turn lead into gold out of greed, one might think, or curiosity. And they were unsuccessful. Chemically, it's just not going to happen. But transformations in the spiritual realm, in the realm of the heart-mind, happen all the time. Where lead turns into gold, and sorrow and loss turn into compassion. It happens all the time. It's not mystical. It's our human birthright. So I think I'll stop there, and I appreciate your listening, sharing, and I would welcome any comments that anyone might have.
Yeah, Will, very insightful and moving as always. Among other cognitive topics, I conduct research on personal epiphanies. So your observations around transformation certainly dovetail with some things